Intersectionality as a theory is important and helpful in thinking about apartheid and the post-apartheid moment. And this piece by Sharon Groenmeijer about intersectionality in apartheid and post-apartheid South Africa, unpacking the narratives of two women, is a really good way to see the transformation that has taken place in South Africa with regards to women and the workplace. It's a case study, and it looks at two women, Ngolo and Nololo, and how they fare in industries that are male dominated. The one is in construction and the other is in the fishing industry. And these women come in through small businesses that they have into this male dominated world, and we see through their lives and through their story, through their narratives, the ways in which part of the working world has not changed, right? And of course, these are very specific industries with very specific histories and have a very specific profile. But I think that the case studies that are given to us by this piece really draw a picture of what takes place in the South African floors, in the South African workplace. And I think this is important for future leaders and managers in South African organizations. Intersectionality can be described as an analysis that aims to reveal multiple identities, exposing the different types of discrimination and disadvantage that occur as a consequence of the combination of identities, right? It also aims to address the manner in which racism, patriarchy, class oppression, and other systems of discrimination create structural inequalities for women, but for also other marginalized groups. This approach takes account of history, it takes account of social and political contexts, but also recognizes unique individual experiences resulting from the coming together of different types of identities. So intersectionality looks at the picture of an individual or in an individual's life holistically, right? In that one inhabits multiple identities, one inhabits multiple positions. And so when you think about an individual life, or you think about lives of people within a group, while they might all be male, while they might all be of the same racial background, while they might all have the same sexual orientation, the combination of those things produce very different realities for those people. And so it's important for us when we think about managing people, when you think about managing a workplace, when you're thinking about policy creation within the workspace, right, to think about the ways in which multiple identities function to oppress and sometimes to privilege certain people. So intersectionality is this theory that enables us to see this, enables us to pinpoint the different ways that different identities impact on people. And so with the text, with this reading about these narratives of these two women, we begin to see how history impacts of them, right? How apartheid played a role in how their parents were affected, how they are now affected, right? How they were affected because of their race, how now they continue to be affected because of their gender, in terms of as women who are trying to penetrate the construction industries and the fishing industries. And so it's important that you see how their identities impact on them and their movement within the working world. So there are a few things I want to highlight about the article and the importance of the article in making us think about women in the workplace. One of the most important things, right, is for us to see the social engineering of apartheid legislation, right? So we know that certain people are allowed to work in certain places and other people were not, right? And all based on race. So this is the social engineering of apartheid legislation, right? So we have to think about how the concepts of race, gender, and class intersected during the apartheid period, right? And then we also have to think about how race, gender, and class continue to intersect in the post-apartheid moment with troubling results, right? Because of course, while we have had a constitution in 1994 that has that now is used as the basis of the rule of law and is used to transform our society, the history and the legacy of apartheid categories and the ways in which the workplace is shaped remain with us, right? You will remember the worst example of apartheid social engineering is the migrant labor system, right, which disrupted family and community life, and the kinds of engineering that was put in place through that migrant labor system remains, right? Even as you see in the example of these two women, right, who are narrated in this piece, and the narratives they tell, they're about the one woman migrates from one place to the other in terms of in search of work. Her husband did the same thing. The parents were also involved in the same thing. So there's a continuity of the migrant labor system within South Africa. But of course, that migrant labor system affects majority black people. And so we need to think about these things as we think about work life, right? And in fact, we can even think about it in our city here, Cape Town, right? In the ways in which there's a discourse around people who arrive in the city from, parts of the Eastern Cape to look for a better life in Cape Town, right? And so in many ways, that itself is a continuation of a migrant labor system, albeit differently and looking for different kinds of work. Whereas the migrant labor system of the past was really geared towards the mines. So the impact of apartheid legislation on the majority of black women is very, very, very important. And this is what this piece is trying to tell us. So here you must think of the black women that are used in this text as a stand-in, right? You could replace them with another marginalized group in looking at a different workplace or a different work environment, right? But they are a great example to show how intersectionality works, but to also show the history of apartheid for a singular group of people and how now they fare in the post-apartheid moment. So women in Bantustans living from home brewing and petty trade is what women used to do in the Bantustans, right? This is because of course, when men left because of migratory labor system. Of course, this encouraged traditional Bantustan authorities to regulate the mobility of women. So this is very important also in thinking about mobility. Who is able to move, who is not able to move, what are the impediments in moving? Because we often think about mobility as, picking up and going. But of course, mobility involves a host of things. Being able to move, having connections in order to move, etc., etc. So it's very important for us to think about how do people move, and it's the narratives of Ngolo and Nololo as they move to construction and the other one moves to fishing industries tells us a lot about the ability or the inability to move of certain people. And it is important also in this piece for us to see how apartheid affected the working class women and men most severely, right? And in fact, when we look at the class situation, one could say this was across the color line. But of course, we know that even within the same class bracket, race plays a pivotal role in the ways in which people experience their lives within apartheid, but also within the post-apartheid moment. So here I want you to really think about this case study of these two women, right, I want you to think about their lives, and I want you to do so in depth, right, and to think about their everydayness, right. The lives of Nqolo and the lives of and the life of Unololo tell us much about working women's experiences in post-apartheid South Africa. There's lots of other pieces about female professors. There's also lots of work on women who are in management, right, in their experiences in the workplace, and so it becomes really important, I think, to think about the daily existence of these women, to think about the minutiae, right? So Nqolo is in construction and Unololo is in fishing. And as I've mentioned before, these are male-dominated industries, right? These are industries that have historically have only men work in them, right? And so what you find is you look at the case studies and the lives of these women, right? Patriarchy is not only in the workplace, in the fishing industries, but it's also at home, right? And so you start to really appreciate then the ways in which intersectionality is trying to make you see how racism on the one hand and then sexism on the other hand impact Black women particularly, right? And it also matters that this is a working class environment, right? Which also gives it a different layer to these women's experiences. And so, as I've said, race is an important factor in both cases. And they demonstrate how our race is implicated, and how race is implicated in both cases, right? And that demonstrates also that race is complex, it's complicated, and that even the kinds of black and white, excuse the pun, ways in which we have conversations around race does not really capture the complexity of people's lived realities. So what is important here is the ways in which all of these factors intersect, right? This is how the theory comes to life, right? You need to think about all the different aspects and all the different ways and all the different positions and all the different identities that these women occupy, and how then those give you their reality. They give you where they stand. They give you where they are positioned. And so in that positioning, sometimes they have power, sometimes they don't, right? And so they have to navigate and they have to maneuver. Like they have to negotiate between different identities and see where they can source power, and where sometimes they just have to give up because there's no way over some of the difficult situation. So what is important here is that these situations cannot be thought about separately from each other. These factors intersect, and that's really what is important here. So, what is the takeaway from all of this? So what is this piece trying to tell us? What is intersectionality trying to tell us, right? So the takeaway from all of this is that intersectionality is a helpful tool, right? It helps us think about the ways that people's lives are layered, right? That people have multiple identities, and these identities impact upon their lives. That these identities that people have, they come with them to the workplace. They influence the work environment. They influence the decisions that people make in the workplace, right? So we must be aware that people do not come from a neutral place, right? They come from a complicated place that is informed by their history, by their identities, by their social positions. And so what becomes really crucial here is that you as future leaders, as future managers, you need to be hypersensitive and hyper aware of people's different identities and how those identities impact their lives. So imagine now these two women Ngolo and Nololo coming into the construction business, coming into the fishing industries, if there are people there who are in leadership positions, who understand their multiple identities, who understand, their positions as women in a male-dominated industry, who understand their positions as black women, who understand their positions as coming from working-class backgrounds, right? They are able to integrate them so much better within those industries. They're able to catch them or are able to protect them from some of the misogyny or some of the racism, if there is, within those workplaces, right? And so it becomes important then for leaders to understand the multi-layeredness of people and the multi-layeredness of people coming into the work environment. And so I think this piece, and I encourage you to read it in a holistic fashion, because it is really helpful to see the kinds of movement that South Africa has done from apartheid to post-apartheid within the work environment. And of course, this is a very particular work environment, but I think that in some ways we can extrapolate from it and think about other work environments, right? So while this piece concentrates on the narratives of these two women in these particular industries, there are lessons here that we can take into, corporate South Africa, that we can take into NGO South Africa, that we can take to, educational institutions of South Africa. And so I want you to think about how this piece, right, speaks to other work environments, right, and other identities, in fact, and how those other identities would fare in this workplace, but also in other workplaces. So after this, we will be talking about the ways in which different identities affect the workplace. And then next week, we'll move on to think about whiteness and unconscious bias. Thank you for your time.